11 News at Prime, thanks for staying on. It's the story that keeps on giving, so it seems. Gauteng High Court has ordered Magudumanas Arum Holdings Limited property company to pay back a doctor and his wife, who have asked not to be named, over 3 million rands for the home it had been contracted to build, plus interest. Arum Properties has also been ordered to pay a doctor's legal costs. For more on this, joined now by Karyn Maughan, journalist who's looking at this legal matter. Karyn, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. We've just heard that Thabo Bester says they've got 30 million rands worth of his stuff. Now we are dealing with this situation where a court is saying, well, you didn't make good on a contract that you had with a customer. How does this all come together? When was this contract put in place, and what were some of the issues that were raised by the courts?
Well, this is an incredibly fascinating story because the deal that was concluded between Arum Holdings and this doctor couple was done in January 2022. Now, this is just a few months before Thabo Bester fakes his own death and escapes from the Mangaung Correctional Center on the 3rd of May 2022. And it's this deal that, where essentially they promise that they're going to build this family their lavish home on a Benoni golf estate, and they will invoice them for whatever costs they require in the building and the construction of this home. But we see over the time period around the escape, there's constant invoices coming in, everywhere between 100,000, 300,000 rand. And I think there's a strong suspicion on the part of the authorities who are looking at this, because they were alerted to it by the judge who was presiding over the case, that this was part of the funding that was used to fund the escape. And it also fits into the matrix of evidence that has been presented by Dr. Merika, Dr. Pashi Nshana to the authorities, where she says that she had been convinced by Thabo Bester, or PK and Kwana, as his name was at that stage, and Dr. Nandipa, that they were going to stage a lavish event for Oprah Winfrey and Gayle King at the time in which they were escaping from the Mangaung Correctional Center. And on the day, or around the day of the escape, she gets a message from them saying that they need a huge amount of money in order to be able to fund some kind of security system. Yeah. So I think that, while the story is interesting and indicative of the various financial activities that have been tied to Dr. Nandipa Magudumana, the biggest story is, was this part of this funding of the escape that enabled them to then bribe, on the version of the state, these various correctional services officials, right, and then to fund their lavish lifestyle after they escaped.
So, quite interesting for me is the fact that, as you mentioned, the contract was entered to while Thabo Bester was still in prison. Not only that, we know now that when he was still there, he had no ID number. So how did he enter into this contract?
Well, this is what's fascinating. The name that is on that contract is for Katleho and Kwana, and it's for an ID number that has one ID, it's got one digit too many, so it's clearly fraudulent. I think the strong suspicion is that that was Thabo Bester. So we then have a question of how was he signing documents in prison? Was it signed on his behalf by Dr. Nandipa? We've also found in the investigations over this period of time that he used a number of different aliases, including, of course, Tom Motsepe, claiming to be a member of the Motsepe family. But this Nkwana name comes up quite a bit, and it was certainly the persona that he used after he escaped from prison to then conduct various allegedly fraudulent business activities while they were on the outside and while they were preparing, specifically in March, to then go on the run to various African countries.
So it's January they get into this particular agreement. Thabo Bester escapes somewhere in May, but breaches are beginning to emerge from what I'm seeing here around November 2022. What's the nature of the breaches that the doctor couple is saying began to emerge?
Well, they don't disclose it in the papers, but it was very clear that there was a specific timeline, there were specific promises made. There's a lot of detail contained in the court papers, and what appears to be quite normal sort of, this is what we're going to do, construction plans. I think it seems from the fact that they agreed to sort of a 3.2 million rand settlement of the 5 million that was spent, that there must have been some kind of construction, but certainly not enough to satisfy that family. And Nandipa, in fact, conceded all of this when she agrees to a settlement agreement with the family and says, no, we will pay back the money, which she then doesn't do. But there is an acknowledgement from her that, there have been material breaches in some respects and that they need to be compensated, and they needed to be given damages as well for various municipal bills that weren't paid. And I think the fascinating thing is that from what we understand, we're aware of at least 2 or 3 other people that are involved potentially in legal processes or potentially going to lay charges in regards to this property company. And it remains to be seen whether they will come out and launch those proceedings or go the criminal route, alleging that what they were subjected to was fraud.
So, Karyn, know how the courts work, and for all of us, these are fascinating details that are coming out, and we have a number of questions. For example, for me, first question is, how were these proceedings conducted? Because we know the 2 who are said to be the owners of this company are behind bars.
Well, basically, they didn't oppose it. Obviously, Bester was not named because, as you rightly point out, he didn't have an ID number. He was under an alias. So the person who is really, and I need to stress this point, in the line of fire here is Dr. Nandipa Magudumana. The judge, the acting judge, Zubair Khan, who was presiding over this, when the case first came to him, said, I need this material to be served on the National Prosecuting Authority. The Financial Intelligence Center, which I understand is actually doing an analysis of suspicious transactions, allegedly suspicious transactions linked to Nandipa's accounts. And then I also wanted to be served on Dr. Nandipa Magudumana. The lawyer in the case said, look, I have been in contact with her lawyers, and, there doesn't seem to be any opposition from their side. So certainly from her side, she didn't oppose this application. That may be because it was brought against Arum Holdings, and that as a director, she may feel that she has some protection against claims being made against her. But if there is shown to be, for instance, potentially fraudulent or illegal activities, that puts her very much in line of claims, her assets, her properties being attached to make good on those debts. At this point, the lawyers for the doctor are going to go after Arum Properties accounts and any assets that they may have. But if they don't recoup that money, they can then potentially look at going after Nandipa Magudumana for those funds.
That would have been my next question. Are those accounts still active, the Arum accounts? Are they active? They were not frozen at the arrest of these 2?
No, as far as I know, those accounts are still active. And there were at least, as far as I know, there were multiple businesses. I think around the region of 6. The Vibes business was involved in the alleged fraud, the scam that happened with Dr. Pashi, for example. And the key point here that I have to emphasize is that Thabo Bester's name is not on any of those contracts. It's all Dr. Nandipa Magudumana. So, unless she turns on him and says he was part of this fraudulent scam, and even if she does, she's very much in line to get these civil claims, these criminal charges, etc., leveled against her in a circumstance where the Health Professionals Council of South Africa has indicated it's going to investigate her for professional misconduct. So she's looking at her entire career being ruined, understandably so in light of the very serious accusations that have been leveled against her. But in addition to that, her estate, her finances being potentially ravaged by multiple civil claims being brought against these companies, which many people have accused of engaging in fraudulent or bad faith activities. And certainly the first of those cases that we are aware of is this matter with Arum Holdings.
So you already mentioned there, Karyn, that there was communication between Dr. Nandipa Magudumana and the couple, where she promised to make the 3 million rands payment. First payment was due, I think, sometime in February. At that time,
February, yeah.
They were already pretty much on the run. But it said that here, the lawyers then contacted the doctors and said, no, there was a property that recently sold from Arum. Is there such a sale that took place?
No, it doesn't appear that that was the case. I mean, it's fascinating when you see the court papers that it very much is apparent that Dr. Nandipa Magudumana was desperately trying to avoid this case ending up in court. So she concedes, look, we owe this money, we're going to pay back this money. The first payment was due in February. That was literally a month before Groundup then starts raising serious questions about Thabo Besta's, so-called suicide in prison. And, they, as you rightly say, the lawyers, they agree we're going to pay 700,000 Rand and then 1.4 million Rand. That first payment isn't made. They say, oh, we're going to, it's because there's been a property sale. That certainly wasn't true. And of course, I think around the mid-March, she then drops her children off at school and goes on the run with Thabo Besta. And I think, what's interesting, you raised in the beginning of this interview, this issue of him saying, I've got 50 million Rands worth of assets. Well, first of all, Thabo Besta is a known fraudster. And I think there will be a lot of question marks over whether his word would count for it. And even if he has proof that he bought these things. But even if his version is to be believed, where did he get that money from? I think it's amazing that he's making that kind of acknowledgement, because certainly it's a potentially very unwise thing for him to be saying, because then the question obviously becomes, you're a convicted rapist murderer. Where exactly did you generate this money from? And, how did you make it? Because on his version, in those months since he's escaped, he claims he was able to just buy 30 million Rands worth of high-value assets, including 2.5 Rolexes, multiple laptops, multiple phones, multiple high-end fashion items. The question then obviously becomes, well, where exactly did that money come from?
Yeah, all these questions hopefully will be answered soon as this matter unfolds. Karyn Maughan, appreciate your time.